I like identifiers.
Hmm.
World, a personal historical sense, you have to go back and evaluate. And,
Ready? All right, let's cut it.
Cut the crap.
All right, cut the past. Let's start with the
So hard to do that.
start the middle. Well, Marshall McLuhan said, the reason why most artists live, why we respect artists is that they live in the generation ahead of us. Most of us are living in the past. Hello and welcome, Radio Tulum Nation. Sorry about that. Just caught us in the middle of a conversation.
I felt rocks falling on me.
And since Marie loves that little personal touch, we leave that in there. But welcome back. We are sitting with Juan Carlos Guerra on our episode 10 of our series on identity. One of the things I personally mark a crucial part of our next evolution. If we want to save anything, we've got to first start with ourselves. And unless we figure out what that self is, even though it's a multidimensional self at the moment, we talked about that self in episode 9, which really directly leads me to the discussion of where we are currently, where the homogenization and ideologies of representing Buy America, because its formulations of the free market systems, I'm sure started in the beginning of the 20th century, or even the industrial age, which really had a full impact, I would imagine, in the early 80s, with trickle down and all these Keynesian economic theories, which now have spread across the world. And in the last, I would say, 5 years or so, this sort of given rise to a real deep sense of nationalistic society. And Juan Carlos, I want to propose this to you. What is happening at the moment with our sense of identity?
At least in the West, now they're following what the East has always done, which is
Interesting. What do
openly
you
and
mean?
overtly come out as collectivists. It was an illusion that we were a free market, individual,
Well,
autonomous.
why don't we define free market? What gave us a sense that free market, because obviously that was also an identity that we wanted to give ourselves, right?
Well, it's the idea that there can be social organization without power.
Right. Or the business holds all the power.
Business is power.
Yeah. Okay.
So they invented this idea that you can reach your maximum individual potential just by following your desires.
And then that would trickle down.
And that would not only trickle down but intersperse within the collective fabric, and that others would follow the example of individual rationalist utilitarians following their own dreams and passions, and that this somehow would create an equilibrium.
You really think that that was what the system had in mind? I mean, wouldn't you really think that Keynesian, Greenspan, because I talk about American leaders of the time of the early 80s, Reagan, who's somewhat of a puppet but also autonomous, created and valued these sort of things. You'd really think that they had that, the theory of trickle-down economics, the theory of, like, let's give more freedom, fuck the EPA, fuck the environment, fuck everything else, and this will shape the world in a better place?
Yes, they thought that economic stability was all that was needed to have social cohesion.
Hmm.
And the problem today is that because you don't have economic stability, you don't have social cohesion. Because you put all the chips of social cohesion in the box of economic growth
Oh,
and
which
stability.
and because of this lack of stability, because of the breakdown of 2008, when 40 years later, when the chips sort of were seen as to really, and us also, you cannot discount, and Juan Carlos, you should check out his book on technology and how it has made us, given us identity. Um, Add that to technology, where the banks are now run basically by algorithms, and the system ran away with itself, and it was uncontrollable. So maybe it has a lot to do with that show of the chips in 2008, where everything fell apart. Is that also what has happened, or what are your theories on as to after the re-advent, because the rich people have been trying to take money forever from everybody. I mean, I think that's always been the case from the, but what do you think? What do you think the timeline is, and where are we?
Well, money itself is a hidden tax currency because it centralizes power and exchange. So, for example, if we have barter and we trade in equal terms or similar terms, say a pig for a geese, for goose, not for geese, what you have is that there's no middleman. So the day we created currency,
we created a middleman.
We established a middleman. So you have to go through that currency and middleman in order to have exchange. So that's what you have. There is the creation of economy.
When was the invention of money? Well,
the
gold coins probably.
The Egyptians used it, but the first currency happened in Lydia in southwest Turkey, 700 BC. With a stamp on it, and that stamp was your leader. So he was the guy in charge of
mostly gold coins.
Not only in collecting taxes, but in creating the market as a concept.
Wow.
So markets can't be free because they are a perimeter, which is well established and kept by power structures. So whatever happens within that free market is always overseen by the overlord. And you need currency in order to work within that market.
Wow. And do you think that that sort of implication, the implication that it has to me is that when you have a system that sort of, even the bankers don't know the system, right? I mean, in a sense, because of technology, when technologies come into this sort of thing, and there's so many AIs running and all these calculations happening at the speed of light almost. How does that affect even the system and the structure that has built it? Because it's no longer, because obviously the politician has changed, because the politician goes through an identity phase where up to the 60s, the identity of a politician, there are rise of politicians that want to save the poor and in effect change through government, whereas now even the politicians just sort of change his identity to curb the system.
Well, it's a total fallacy to say that reason can really trump every other aspect.
Again, trumped.
Facet of human existence, culture. So what you had is a transition from the time we created currency to now, in which economics became king. The time currency was created, it was jostling, struggling, fighting over power with other power structures like religion. Today, economics is king, and finance is
the
crown
ultimate, the crown
over the
emperor, really.
So the thing is, we put all the chips in one box. And identity, which was big in the times before economics, was said, no, well, identity is not so important. We are rational beings. We don't need to fight over whose God or power state structure is important. No, Just give people a job and an opportunity to prosper, and everything will be solved.
Hence the 50s America, right?
Yes.
Well, aside from the racism, I mean, the rise of the middle class was the greatest aspect of why, after Americans go to World War II and they're respected all over the world because they're warriors, and then the rise of the middle class, the poor, you know, what's the great land of the free?
I've stepped on him over by
okay.
mistake.
All right, radio's down below. The rise of the middle class gave that big, you know, you can make it in America. You can have this dream, the dream of anybody being able to make it, was actually the identity. Aside from, I think, hidden, it was suppressed. Not suppressed is not the right word, but all the other identifiers were sort of put on the wayside to this dream. That's what made America, and everybody wanted to come to America, and how slowly that has changed. So your very, very poignant point about the fact that identity wasn't, or has never really been, that much of us. After we go into language and the printing press and the information age, but I think it was Marshall McLuhan that said, when you live in a big information age, technology becomes big business, art and culture become big business, and when those things become big business, it's all about imprisonment.
Meritocracy is an illusion, because it can work when the conditions are equal. And as I told you, the system's promise was that, well, meritocracy is a rational aspect. So we don't need to be worried about the old, the traditional structures. But it's false, because in the end, you have race, ethnicity, culture, position you're in society, in power terms, that establishes up to a big sense what your possibilities are in life as an individual and as a group. In America, in Europe, or in any other part of the world.
Well, I
it's
mean,
now copying the West.
Exactly.
model.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, but the in the last 5 years, this great rise of nationalistic politics, this uber restrictive, fascistic, you know, sort of pride that probably comes around all the time. You know, like if you go back to the history of World War II and the rise of Hitler and all these things, this sort of get the people together and you're against somebody. The identity of violence, that, you know, as much as identity as a group is good, where a tribe will take care of each other, you can also be manipulated. And now that this system has been running, the point I'm trying to make is that the system, where it was experimentation, where it was like, okay, I think if we do this, this actually may be great.
It's a very old strategy. When there's
So
no...
it is a strategy. It's strategic. It's not that they wanted to try Keynesian economics and all these theories. You think it was all about control?
When there's no chips on the table, you shake the table. And when you shake the table,
you look under the corners.
You shake and shape the contents and the players that are sitting around the table. So what you have with nationalism and pinpointing fingers is deflecting the blame onto others. And
But why do you think that there's been such a rise on Trump's or the Brazilian president or the French president? I mean,
because
or
they're good at shaking the table.
so you think it's just a matter of shaking the table, but so people so easily and willingly willing to follow against their self-interest almost this sort of identity?
No, they're not going against their self-interest. They're just being told who's to blame. And as I tell you, it's not the people.
Oh, you're saying who's to blame in the sense of those guys are to blame,
but not us.
not us. You know, they
Yes.
did this to us, so let's focus our
Talk about Donald Trump, who started big speculation in New York in the 70s.
right.
He was the comprador of the financial elite, who was responsible of convincing the state of lowering taxes for construction and finance. And he developed New York in a speculative fashion and constructed all these buildings that now he boasts about.
Well, which all went bankrupt.
Yes, including his casinos in
including
Atlantic City.
in Taj Mahal, exactly, and that was
So-
the demise. The reinvention started occurring at that
So
point.
the oligarchy is always good in pointing fingers, and especially that the free market can't be defended as free with this nationalism and neo-mercantilist policies that are not free anymore and market-wise. So well, now China and Russia and the emerging BRICS powers are cracking jokes at the West, especially the United States, talking about dogmatic free market principles, which are not feeding individualistic narratives anymore because they're not being followed up with individual responses. But collectivism, just like the Mandarins and the fascist politics of Russia or Soviet Union. I mean, we are coalescing into the same way of fighting over the last remnants of resources that are available for 8 now billion people and counting. And so the reality is just hyped, fast, forceful ways of trying to get a hold of what's left in this dying world.
So you think, how does identity play a role in this illusion almost of separatist and nationalistic views? I mean, because obviously there's so many things that are needed right now with the climate change crisis and the earth just going to shit. I've often heard is that it's the right before everything changes, it gets really messy. Do you think that there's is that a possible?
It's easier to get control, to take control of what's left when everyone's on board and on your side. So, easy example. Mexico is to blame because of these poor
Immigrants,
thieves, you know what I'm saying?
rape,
But when everyone's on board, then you take over Mexico's resources for the sake of America, United States. So if you didn't have everyone on board, it would be more difficult to sell the story that they are the ones to blame.
Yeah, but the point, I mean, it may be all pretty much the same story, but I mean, it's like Brazil is cutting down its, I think I saw a recent chart where it said it's cutting down 2 football fields of rainforest per day. And the president is saying, the rainforest doesn't belong to the world. It belongs to us, and we'll do whatever the fuck we want with it. So fuck off. I mean, whereas the politicians of England, I mean, all of these people are now out for themselves. And, the collective has given way to nationalistic, right? So is there a curb, or do you know that you can pinpoint? Obviously, it's the free market. But what has happened in the recent times that warrants such a change?
Change from what to what?
Change from heading towards late 90s, early 2000s, when information age is just starting out and the internet is at its, peak. And we're feeling like a sort of a collective force of nature. It's in the air. I know I felt it, where for all of humans are going to come together in some form and save the planet.
It's an illusion.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
probably.
always been.
Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe all the back
From
channeling.
from the political side, it is an illusion. Because they're telling you can use identity to save the world.
At this moment, I mean, the politics of fear probably started in Bush area, right? It's Karl Rove. I mean, probably even before
We'll
that.
go back to Jimmy Carter, Nixon.
I don't know. Jimmy Carter, the man who put solar panels, is the anomaly between
He
Nixon.
pinpointed Iran and these Strait
No.
of Hormuz as the most important
No,
lane in the world
no, I
for
don't
the
think so.
upkeep of energy.
No, but he also said do away with. Anyway, we're not going to argue about Carter.
No.
Carter, I think, is an anomaly between the Nixon and the Fords and all of the power structures because,
He was working for the same structure.
sure,
the
I
empire.
mean, no doubt, but I think that there was a sense about him that was forthcoming.
Like
you know.
Obama, like he stood for change.
No,
and
Obama is the greatest centrist you'll ever find. I don't
continued
think
everything that was on the
Obama
table?
is the most killing.
Please
I mean,
give me a break
no,
here,
no,
man.
I don't believe in Obama doing. I mean, a great.
Let's stay with the economic side.
Yeah. That's why I wasn't trying to go political, but the system is what affects the economic side,
Yes.
right. So it is the system that is built to in order for the business free market side to filter through everything, which creates identity. So is the identity of a public now so wrapped up in money and what I have and what you don't have, and can we ever change it? Is my question. Where are we?
Well, it did change. It is changing because you don't have money and jobs in the West.
Right, and that's what.
Structural unemployment.
But so, do you think that that's what gives rise to a nationalistic
Yes.
fervor?
Yes, because they're
Well,
going.
it's just like Germany, right?
They're
When they have
going
no
back
money.
to a stage before, which was technically transcendent, because money was taking over. So because you can hear the cents anymore and the bills, well, what do we give the people? Give them a collective sense of identity, so that they could come on board and we could go after what's left. Because the biggest change, and you were asking, what's happened since the 90s that's scaring the West, is the rise of the East, and of at least 3 billion people that are now also fighting over the resources that gave you progress since the 1600s in the Netherlands.
Well, the imperialism, the
Now everybody's a mercantilist.
Yeah.
Look at Russia, look at China.
right.
So we also want tickets to the same party that you've been throwing for 400 years.
So you think it goes back to the resources?
It's
It's just
only-
raping the land of this earth
Yes,
that as
it
much as possible?
Yes, because you still have a collective sense of identity being fueled by centralized power of land, resources, and projections of what we could aspire to do as groups.
Hence throwing away the EPA and throwing away everything possible.
And
I
destroying
mean,
everything.
anything that's been built, there's been some great things built, like the Environmental Protection Agency. So many agencies are being destroyed. I mean, another cause of
Alternative energies,
that never gave rise. That they just won't allow to.
they're taxing them to death now.
Yeah, exactly. And so you think that it's because of resources, which is an interesting, fascinating thing, and hence the deforestation of the Amazon, or I mean the big oil crisis of the late 70s that led eventually would lead to NAFTA, or prior to that controlling all the oil fields. America controls all the oil fields in Mexico, isn't that correct?
It's a resource-based economy, basically. For 10,000 years. We haven't transcended that.
Yeah, it's
And,
just so strange to me that that there's been such a rise of such closed-in identity that even when I talk to friends, it's often with pride that they give them a sense who wouldn't 10 years ago be talking as curt or as sort of identifying with their own country.
Exactly, and that's the problem. That's the biggest hurdle. This linkage of race, land, and resource. So it's the manifest destiny meant land and resources for Americans,
Right,
not
that's
for the
great.
Chinese. So we can't go global, and I can't espouse this idea that identity and in the collective sense is going to save us, because it's linked to race and land.
And it's also linked to China buying Africa and
It's the
also
same-
owning the debt
well,
of
they are
America.
worse.
No, I mean,
It's a Han identity.
yeah, no, but what I'm saying is it's also the rise of the fear of politics and the resources are because, while we weren't looking, basically, we were concentrating on stupid things like the finance and all this other stuff, trying to squeeze as much money of the middle class as we could. China China gave rise and is all of a sudden smarter,
Yes, because
smarter than any American
we
could.
lost the real economy by concentrating on finance, and China took over the real economy by manufacturing and reconstructing global trade, which United States abandoned because they were now interested in dollarizing the world for the world to work and the wages to go down so the US could just consume and fall in debt and wait for the others to save them. But once that system collapsed with the mortgage 2008 hysteria, China said, well, America's not going to be our consumer market forever because they don't have purchasing power. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to develop our own domestic market, and we need to look around to our neighbors to help develop them into the consumer market that's going to propel us into the 22nd century.
Wow, that's an interesting point. Hence Africa, hence
Vietnam, hence the
Vietnam,
South
and
China
Asia,
Sea, hence even Russia,
hence owning Hong Kong and
even Europe,
yeah.
even
Well,
Germany.
Russia is really trying to also.
Russia is spearheading this operation.
Yeah.
They have the nukes and the balls, the meatballs, because the metal balls that the Chinese use for the yin yang are in the box in
And
the treasury.
you know, we were talking about something. I was listening to a lecture about, first of all, the illusion of identity, and secondly, the violence that has, you know, I think you and I touched base about how Al Qaeda's identity revolves around the identity to hate the West, and to, which triggered probably a false, a sense of fear, not a false sense, but a sense of fear, which led to a lot of changes. I mean, obviously that's the first attack on American soil. Are you a conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, I mean,
You think that it is?
Al Qaeda is not an identity thing. It's just a mercenary group that's being paid off by someone who's interested in using identity as a way to separate more the peoples of the Middle East in order to divide them and take over their land and resources.
Wow. So you
including the ISIS and all these peoples.
wow, that's an interesting
They're
theory.
just costumes. They're clowns in costumes with
well,
guns.
I mean, but don't you think that that's what? So if somebody is controlling it, that gives rise to your able to use fear to re-identify the identifiers.
It's simpler. If they are uniting as a group,
We unite as a group.
There you go.
You know.
Because they're a big threat. Well, we need a bigger threat.
Right, and
we
it's the
have the
same
bigger
politics of the Cold War.
Well, the Cold War. This is from Mesopotamia.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But
so
it's
are we
bigger now.
living in a cyclical world that will never ever have the possibility of I mean, you know, of creating a sense of identity that's collective? I mean, I remember, I don't know how old I must have been. I wrote this movie when I'm in 1984, 85, which was thinking about a world where I think the whole story was taking place. It was like sort of Terminator meets, and what
dystopia.
No, it was dystopia and utopia all at once, because what had happened was there was a young girl who was going to take over the government that was run by artists that had come along in a time where the free market system has destroyed the skies. So there were no more skies left. There was nothing left up top. So, gracias. So they were traveling through these tunnels. The whole story takes place of a grandfather taking this young girl through tunnels in the oceans. And he's explaining the story of what
Is that a
happened.
Tom Cruise movie?
Maybe, I don't know. But the idea was that there was these artists who would who took it upon themselves to say, fuck all you free market people. We're going to try to readjust and balance. But this was a time where the artists had become senile and all power corrupts. So she had to come in. And there was one newspaper all over the world. It was like sort of a utopian in the sense that we had come to the point where there was no separated cultures. And I think I was contemplating on the idea is, can we ever get away back to the ancient durable order of humanity, the identity of being human, which is the core identity that we have, which is the evolution.
I'm not a retro romantic. I don't think there ever was human identity. I think the first.
No,
human
not saying there was one, but the evolution of the understanding
Yeah,
that's
so that's the
that's
difference. Yes,
frequencies
yes.
that are running are making us more and more aware. Maybe the biggest conflict is the poor and the rich, but are making us certainly aware that there's all the fucking problems are fairly the same wherever.
Well, I think that's what fuels art, in a sense. The idea that we can express our ways into freedom of
Mm.
identity and be able to, as we talked in the other show, just to use whatever levers of conceptual frameworks that we are meshed in order to liberate ourselves from the excess of collectivism and be able to unite in new forms of narrative and grouping that are less interested in power. Not in money in exchange, because we all need to make a living. We are still in a material world, but something that's not so tied up with what we need to give back all the time, in like taxes or church affiliation or voting. But until the system breaks down completely, we're not going to be able to have a very easy, a very clear path towards that.
Well, that brings me to the great Arthur Rimbaud line, where some destruction is necessary.
Deconstruction, it's what we can aspire to.
Deconstruction, yeah, obviously, but in the sense of this massive force of nature is Arthur Rimbaud. He would just tell you like it is. It's destroyed and rebuild, but deconstruction, which I don't even know how it's possible when the Buddhists of Burma are going after the small sect of
Rohingya.
the Rohingya. So if everybody's identifying in this nationalistic sort of way, and you see new conflicts happening all the time, first we need to define. Obviously, so you're saying to me that it's a fear-based. It's a fear of resources and also the understanding that who's going to control the next 100 years.
And it's also the hearts and minds. Because now that you say Burma and the struggle for identity, it took, 300 years after the death of Siddhartha Gautama for not his figure originally, but for his symbols were used by monarch in the north of India, Ashoka, and the Buddha was being used as national identity, 300 BC. So, we want you to follow his path.
The middle path.
The middle path, but it's him. And it's him who's my friend. And Buddhism was exported to Southeast Asia, and it was used to establish independent kingdoms based on national identity and religion.
You said exported. Oh.
Well, missionaries originally.
Right, just like the Christians. It's the same free market. Like, here's the way they did it. Let's go do it this way.
Well, no, that happened before Christianity, but they were following the same ways of the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, which is, missionaries can bring, like the Buddha, a path and a way of establishing freedom. But then you don't want individual freedom because you need people to conform to a collective sense of participation and identity. So the day after freedom opens a door, you close it with collectivism. So religion grew out of this middleman's idea of including you in their sense of whatever liberation was or transcendence, but collective. Not individual. And if you have everybody running away from your idea of who we are, then who's going to follow me? Who's going to?
If you don't divide, you don't get anybody.
There's no flag to wave.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you think that this kind, but it goes back to the last discussion we had of trying to create something that will inform and enlighten beyond and into action, something of a ball rolling to. A new sense of collectivism, which is under humanity. But the idea being that it's always been happening that but I go back to leaders, I go back to there was an altruistic leaders that formed this. And it goes back to, why the 10th Sikh. I didn't finish telling you the story of the 10th Sikh. The reason why in the Sikhism there's only a book is because the 10th prophet, or the 10th Sikh, Guru Gobind, realized that if he stayed up north, that there would be other gurus that would come along and change the concept. So that's why he traveled all the way south to about 200 kilometers away from Mumbai, and that's where he ended up dying, and Christianing the book as the book, and that's it. That there's no way that you can take the idea and as Ashoka did, and formulate it. Of course, the British came, and then they would actually create a collective of the Sikhs, who would eventually be the 80% of the people that died on both sides, who were the warriors. But it's interesting to go back to the leaders. There were, from Abraham, circumcision, maybe that was because people were having some big problems down there. And
cultural norms.
No, but I'm saying that I'm just talking about leaders, or Christ looking around at all the money lenders and the great men of the church who were fucking and collecting money, and or Buddha that sees the world, or Nanak, or Martin Luther King, or messengers of whom, or what?
Of their message. They wanted to emphasize the message, not the temple, not the dogma.
Exactly.
So what we need today,
a way of life.
A way of life.
A way of life, which is exactly what the politicians are doing, almost as gods in our celebrity culture.
Led by example.
Yeah.
Which is what the message was meant for.
Do unto others.
So what we need to come from full circle is to see groups and collectivities in less ambitious ways. And
what do you mean by that?
Come back to smaller units.
In what sense?
Break down the nations. Break down the European unions. And let localities.
Are you going as far back as, like, let's say it's not even Germany
City
anymore? There's Munich.
City-states.
City-states.
But
when was the last time that existed? In Greece?
In Greece, maybe.
Yeah.
The Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Europe, Italy, but they nevertheless were fighting each other. But smaller groups. Now that we have scarce resources, we need to devolve power. But this is too much for the centralized
That's crazy
democracy.
thought, though. But imagine Massachusetts and Nevada, or
It's a confederacy.
That's not real.
We're gonna have to get
I
there.
mean, you think so?
Yes, we're gonna get there, because we're not gonna have the resources to keep the big nations and the big lies going on forever. So we're gonna have to devolve power without fighting this growth of creativity within their own interest groups, and not chase them because it's our land, and your resources are not yours because they're on my land. This has been going for 5,000 years or more, and we need to cut the crap before the crap cuts us. And this is where we're getting, because we're going to be fighting over big ideas and big identity groups, fighting over oil and fossil fuels, which are going to cut our lifespan, and they're going to cut the options and the alternatives already available for the majority, and that have been available ever since the creation of culture, but that had been taken over by small groups that want to keep those resources for longer time, because the nation and culture within has to have a time-based, slow cooking based, because we don't want individuality to take over. We want small time frames, and we want you to follow this. That's crazy. It's not working.
Well, I mean, individuality within a sense of communal identity is what's really necessary. I mean, I don't think, I think I wrote in a piece recently to my young cousin, as much as you should know yourself, you should also have a responsibility to the whole of all
and
of.
there comes technology.
Right, that's what I was
We
going to bring up.
use technology and we construct networks of immediacy and of necessity. And we create confederations.
But do we create confederation? That takes me back to how the system is now rigged to the point where it's scientifically rigged, where we are pigeonholed. You know, even with technology, taking Facebook for an example, my group is a pigeonhole, almost horse blinders in a horse race of just this small, little, narrow-minded, narrow vision of ideas.
And I mean, this is where the other topic we talked before comes in. We have to know, we have to have a conceptual mind in order to deconstruct and use what we need for group mind and individual adventures. So we don't break away completely from the structure. We don't destroy technology. We use it and we reuse it and we give it a new significance for our new motivations.
Easier said than done, Juan Carlos.
Well,
But
it's-
before
I
we
know
get
it's
into the
utopic,
technology,
yes.
no, but it's not utopic because you just gave an answer of nationalism. And you know, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was that maybe nationalism, this rise of real fucking horrible
Old ways.
old school ways, as my girlfriend likes to call me sometimes, old school ways of hoarding, of real, like, my power, my thing, tying up. And you think that it could be that we are heading towards a sort of a city state, but that's not because it's going to happen
No.
because of anybody's mind. It's just that the depletion of resources.
Systems breakdown is going to force us into being more aware of our surroundings. Not about America great again, because America, what do Californians have in common with North Dakotans nowadays? I mean, North Dakotans are basically farmers,
Yeah.
and Californians are spearheading the cybernetic revolution. That's why they want to break away, because their economy is localized and regionalized.
And also, it's a world economy.
Yes, but they can confederate with other parts of the world in the cybernetic sense. Not
Oh my
go
God! So you even go beyond your country and you go look at and say, oh well, you know, there's Taiwan,
They
maybe
already-
Taiwan and
they-
China and California.
Come on, they're against Trump. The day Trump won, they legalized marijuana. And they started a movement to separate the state of California from the United States. And Trump's nationalism trumped this idea. It was blown out of the water. Because you don't want succession.
You don't want succession in what sense?
Separation.
Yes,
Secession.
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 Yeah, and
Succession, that's a different thing.
yeah. So I mean, that's a really a vision that I would never have even thought of. That perhaps this nationalism is a prefix to sort of the drying up of resources and a reaction, maybe a reaction to our greatest fears, which is having nothing.
Yes, and a bad economy means that you're not harnessing the resources well, or you don't have them, or someone else is doing it for you.
Or the fact that the poor, I mean, the great divide between the money people right now, it's getting so widened that, you know, there is no hope for the middle class. So maybe that's why, led with a celebrity culture, they follow a king, so to speak.
Yeah, because they exported the middle class to the east. Because
No,
the
that's
middle class
interesting.
jobs in the west, well, they're earning, say, $10 an hour. And the business say, well, I'm not a patriot, so I'm just going to pay $1 an hour. What do I have to do? Well, I have to export the jobs. It means I'm going to pay a Chinaman $1 an hour in his country, and I'm going to save on resource allocation because I'm going to use their resources in their backyard, and I'm just going to pay for the logistics for the finished product back home.
And
Well, that sounds great for business, but it's bad for the economy back home, and it's bad for jobs and the nation back home.
Well, I mean, you've also created a middle class in India and in China. The rise,
Throughout the whole world.
well, through the whole third world.
They don't give a damn about the middle class back at home. And the nation needs a middle class to thrive. And they need social order to thrive. How are you going to have a social order if you externalize everything but the fucking flag, which
Well,
is
mobile-
you're waving back home?
Yeah, you have to have a mobile mobility.
Flag is just a symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
Beyond-
There's a
beneath-
glass ceiling that's been getting lower and lower.
Yes.
That is creating this sense of identity. But the vision that you just put forth, which is that confederacies of like-minded industry, so to speak, right? Is that what you're saying?
You already have them.
You know-
California is a confederacy of like-minded business.
No, but I'm saying that you would go to Taiwan and say, okay, let's hook up and we'll create our own little world. I mean, I can't fathom that and how that would help society and the human condition.
It's not going to help. Look at the economic structure. It's already happening. This 1% are
Yeah.
reaping the benefits of this economic confederacy, which is happening ever since the 80s.
Between the finance industry and the technology industry and any kind of fucking industry
There's the 4 corporations. It's finance,
media.
media,
Technology.
Yes, high tech and media, and energy and transformation
Uh,
industry.
And do you think that there's a way? So if we go to city states, how do we identify? How do we break this identity down? I mean, is there any aside from maybe I don't even know if Elizabeth Warren will be able to do anything, but who is the person? Have you had any inspired people around you in your studies in recent times that you find could lead us out of this jungle of mutual hatred for every?
She's called nature, and she's forcing us to cooperate beyond identity. And what you see at this nationalistic jingoism is just a last resort before
So
nature
you do believe that
floods our wills into submission, which is what's happening.
And so
already.
we always, as human race, have to be hit over the head
Well, it
before we
happened.
change
This
anything.
is the sixth extinction, mass extinction. And I'm sure the last extinction was a forceful way of making people cooperate back in the Paleolithic, whatever it was.
Well, you
So-
didn't have a choice. I mean, when the
So
volcano
Well,
erupted.
Donald Trump's not using that as a campaign slogan, but we're being forced to cooperate. So it's an anachronism. People like him, ideas like his.
Well, not
and
just his. A lot of people
well,
around
he
the world.
represents a way of doing things. So I think we're being forced, as you see in Quintana Roo, to cooperate. Now Playa del Carmen needs to cooperate with Tulum to find solutions to the seaweed problem. And we need to include everyone because we're going to lose our jingle bells if we don't do something about it before December comes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've already lost. It's already become a 5-month season around here, and I was at the beach a couple of weekends ago. But I mean, it's a lovely thought, and hopefully there won't be so much of Mother Nature won't come along. I think that's one of the great things about Tulum when I did the documentary is that they would often use Mother Nature. That twice Mother Nature has come along in Tulum, right after Pablo Escobar, and then another time where a hurricane came and destroyed everything and leveled everything, and restarted. Had to restart everything.
No, man. Not back to square one.
Well, I mean, hopefully Radio Tulum will stay intact, and but nonetheless, I mean, I still find it a bit, abhorrent that us as a people just don't realize the cause of nature and what's in our self-interest. And I think it isn't a fixed solution. I mean, what I believe is that that's why we have this episodes of identity, is that we have to fix the core. And if you were to find what is the core of the fix, aside from just nature hitting us over the head with a big tidal wave and wiping out, because that doesn't even seem to teach us anything.
It's substituting welfare for the tragedy of the commons. It means we can't be hypocritical anymore, and that we are really interested in the welfare of the people. We can
Just
see
be
now
honest.
that there's evidence that we don't care about the welfare. I mean, this welfare was a British idea. Look at the tragedy of the commons now. I mean, we are in urgent need of seeing this planet as common good. And we need to really start sharing our way out of this trouble
Yeah,
we
but
got
how do you
ourselves in.
how do you foresee that ever happening with the rise of nationalism?
It means
I
going
mean, I don't know. Is there a leader that's going to guide us there? How the fuck do you see that
gonna be
happening?
Moses again.
Yeah, I mean, who's
No,
going to part the
no,
fucking
it's
sea?
teaching teaching people, planting the seed that tragedy of the commons, having a common outlook means going beyond family, race, the flag, and the affiliation of my church. It means that we need to break with this idea that it's only me and my people
Brother,
that
yeah.
need to survive, and we need to look into the eye and take everybody into account, because we will all suffer the same fate if we don't.
Yeah, well,
We're in the
that's
same
that's the
boat.
right type of
We're
fear,
in the same boat.
and not the fear of
We all
losing.
need to
Exactly. Row.
Row in the same direction.
I mean, I don't disagree with Juan Carlos, and you know, we try to create actions that lead to the open mind and to fix the core heart, that will actually have that consequence of us going back to realize that we're actually a part of nature, not separate from nature, because that's the great swindle that has been proposed to us. The derisional mind that has caused us utilitarian mind, that we own everything, that we are not just a mosquito in the galaxy.
Well, we're a fly. It would be good to be a mosquito.
It'd be nice to have.
Fly's dirtier.
Yeah, well, as long as you have some reincarnation going on, because I would like my mind to come up. But I still find it, you know, and this would be amazing. To turn to this point of lack of common sense. You know, the amount of lack of common sense from the uneducated, illiterate who just rises towards a celebrity, to even us intellectuals who propose utopian, you know, or possibilities, or explore. We always say, "Oh, we're not giving you any answers." You know, we're just kind of sitting around talking about it. What are the actual actions that gives us that re-identifies ourselves with nature?
Awareness.
That's a good word. Tell me more.
Action.
For sure. But how would you propose the Mayan who goes and cleans, I don't know, the toilets, or the one who is in the...
He's the most aware of them all. By cleaning
okay,
toilets.
let's not clap at that. Maybe, you know, I mean, yeah, maybe. But you know in your heart of hearts that generally the great leaders that we were talking about earlier that came along and took a look as a collective people and had a good value to rise the people up into a more altruistic way, you still need that. You need, you know, you can clap about the Mayan cleaning the thing. Oh, yeah, he's very well aware because he's Mayan. No, there a lot of uneducation, not a way to express yourself, stuck in a psychological place where you're seeing other people take your fucking land and take your money. There's no way he's more aware. He doesn't even know how to deal with his emotions, let alone express them. And they come out with, they come to violence, and they come to other things that are repudiated. So let's not delude. I'm sick of deluding ourselves just because we use the word sorry.
No, man, we need both things.
I mean, you know, but what I'm saying is we do need both things. And let's not clap. Oh, yes, the Mayan. Everybody, it's a poor and rich thing. It's an educated, uneducated thing. And it's the hearts that are broken, you know.
I didn't mean the ethnic Mayan.
No, I mean, it was more about the clap.
Common practice and leadership have to merge. We have to take leadership, we have to base it on our real immediate world, which is changing, and we need to, on top of that, propose a rational way out of our mess. But if we leave the material, earthly, real basis out of the equation, we are going to end up being
Fuck up.
abstract, hunker down intellectuals, which is what we don't want, at least me.
Exactly.
So,
Well,
I
you
mean, I'm reminded of this by having to eat and go to the toilet afterwards every day. That if I don't look after my material aspect, there's no rational or intellectual mind that's gonna spearhead me towards ultimate transcendence or utopicity.
I think you had a good point about city-states. I wouldn't go as far as creating, or I don't see that far ahead into the future to say that there may be city-states, but there can be pockets of places which harness this sort of spirit, such as
City-states.
Radio Tulum. I don't think it's city-state.
Enclaves.
Enclaves of transformative spaces where your expression can be expressed and you are regenerating little soldiers and little hearts that can actually filter through the world. And I think it's going to 3 generations out or so before we even see the results of this.
I want to separate the political and the art and expressive. When I said the city-state, it's not that I like the city-state or that I love the state.
No, I didn't say.
No,
I just think
mean
it's
is we are going to be forced into city-states because the federal government, central government, is not going to be able to provide either resources or identity when the former are not available. What I want to synthesize is that my optimum utopic and idealistic approach would be to have autonomous, smaller groups of free-thinking enclaves that could be aware of their surroundings, take that into account, and from there, rationally propose emotional and open-hearted, expressive ways of life.
Well, that's
And if that could use Radio Tulum and technological ways, I'm all for that.
Well, we're always going to continue on the path of creating space, whether it be space via conversation, more importantly, action. And the action is the space itself, is that you enter it and you are in a new temple of expression and allowed the safety, because the safety is missing. I think my producer is telling me we're 7 minutes over. But
You're boring people.
Fuck them if you can't listen. Otherwise, there'll never be a change. And we've got to send it out in the frequency. And I think that's another adage. Don't ever believe that what you're doing for the good of everything has to be noticed. It is more important to send it out into the frequencies and to participate loudly, boldly, aggressively, and consistently. Not just about going to a march, ladies and gentlemen. It's about the continuation and what that does.
Yeah.
And without being preachy at all, I believe also, Juan Carlos, is that perhaps the rise of nationalism, bringing back to the nationalism topic, is our last resort before people wake up. I can't.
That was exactly.
But I cannot say that I see that it's a sort of a Republicanish idea to be less governmental, and I know you give it a reason because we have no resources. Can the government manage anything? So it's the place where the resources reside. They will say, okay, well, we have these resources. Maybe it'll even go to a barter system. I'm not sure, but it is without a doubt in my mind that we have to create leaders, and without the fucking leaders. And I know the new millennials, and I know they're looking for this sort of non-hierarchical society, but we're not there yet. We are at least 3 generations beyond you having to listen to people that know shit, and you need to be informed of your history, and to know your own truth and know your own identity, and that's only through hard work.
Yeah, I do agree on that. And in the end, it's about being yourself. But yes, self-transforming yourself.
Yeah.
Without all the yingo, and putting that, sharing that, and make that your fraction.
Fraction. That's a good word.
Presence, And yes, we need to know things. But yeah, I would also invite people to look at that horizontally and participate and share in order for the base to rise in mass in the sense of more rationality, more love, and more peace. And from there, leadership will come, but not the other way around.
Well, you've heard it here. We are so glad to end this season of identity on the topic of the rise of all of us. So rise up, my brothers and sisters. It ain't that far out, and it ain't that lack that we can't do it. Surrender to the notion that it can all be saved, and it'll all be saved. Hear the love in all that you do. This is Juan Carlos Guerra, my close friend, and I am Mandeep, and we welcome you to our home and to the world of an independent voice. Be that independent voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
We out.
For good.
Good job. That was a little passionate. That was good.
Well,
I got to get it in there.
no sparks.